Oh, well, now I wanted to have a kind of fleshed out discussion on socialism since the last couple of days has been pretty interesting with that viral event going on with AOC and the dress and the optics coming out of that, as well as the communism and fascism debate that was really interesting that the Killstream did. I guess I'll kind of be a react Andy to that somewhat as well. Um, but yeah, I guess if I was gonna start this off, um, I think the debate was a really good way to kind of look at some of the things I've been talking about in regards to contemporary socialists and their kind of wits end, especially when it comes to the kind of Marxist view and this sort of legacy, um, the kind of material, historical analytic. Um, it's important to point out that to follow fascism kind of comes along as the sort of almost as the kind of dialectical approach to the material with regards to the mind duality and psychoanalysis. This is why I think Marxist thinkers later kind of adapt to psychoanalytics and whatnot, because ultimately they kind of saw the problem with sticking to this materialistic lens. When you have the kind of rational Western traditional thought of duality of the consciousness. And you could say that obviously Marx was would talk a lot about the consciousness, but he kind of he flipped it on its head and went about it in the opposite direction, as opposed to ideas being out there and then actualized. The material form comes first, but I think it's important to kind of maybe synthesize this with what Spangler had to say about Marxism is going to ultimately be left in that kind of 18th century line of reasoning, because the 19th century to follow and the subsequent aftermath of it would revolve around psychology and the processes of the mind. And I think that really sticks, and it's kind of fundamental to understanding this debate, because you have this sort of understanding of mental degradation all around us, society, this sort of constant anxiousness and suicidal, nihilistic tendencies within us, and the kind of black pilling that's constantly surrounding our body politic in general. And I think it's important to realize that this sort of materialistic dialectic that's being approached here, I don't really think even sufficiently answers that question, other than we gotta have to do this process of the intellectuals ultimately going back within their own historical and framing within communism, where the intellectuals kind of subvert the bourgeoisie, and we use this sort of dialectic to achieve a global proletariat and revolution, and ultimately the the kind of utopian outlook that we see among the communist thinkers. But it's important to perhaps see that why does the fascist thinker come along and say, well, let's perhaps not have this sort of struggle through dialectic and look for a sort of class collaboration to begin with, and this is kind of like what Spengler set out to do in his own view of Prussianism and the sort of attainment of rank and the sort of brotherhood of the kind of what I would say is sort of a different kind of hierarchical social stratus of gamesmanship, whether it's in the military rank in the kind of Spengler sense, or I think capital would actually be the kind of foe to that. And that's actually kind of maybe an interesting out towards what Adorno and Horkheimer would talk about, that I liked quite a lot, about the cultural industry, where you kind of have these new ideas and new platforms and innovation that ultimately gets kind of subverted by mass media and the consumption of this kind of mass subject that ultimately, funny enough, the communists in the debate end up justifying through policy in the end to anyway this sort of inevitable degradation and dehistorical rootness should just be ushered in because of the inevitability of it. I don't really think that holds up, and this kind of goes back in the end to why the theoretician has to complement the worker if they want to be a true a true and real socialist, if you will. And this is the problem with communism and this sort of socialist framing, is that ultimately its historical rootage goes back to the subversion of the intellectual class and seeing the world in this different angle that ultimately results in them reifying what class collaboration will turn out to be in their own favor to begin with. Ultimately, in the end, right, it is about class collaboration does come about. It's just the fascist thinkers came along later and ultimately said, why don't we just try to shoot for that now? And I don't really think that there was an answer to that in the debate, nor does any kind of introspection on, it's kind of funny that it was touted in the kind of ethnic portion about systems and their representation and the sciences and what is considered someone within your nation state. These are ultimately suppositions and properties that were agreed upon among those people to begin with. And so this is kind of a reprisal on scientific understanding in general. Simply, I guess to put it simply, you're to just accuse racial hegemony of being a product of modernity doesn't really miss the point of how it was revealed to them to begin with, and that sort of relationship within it of itself. And I think that's a problem that theory bros don't really answer enough, is why would this system, why does the Cartesian phase space, for example, become this unified signal with among the West? And it's ultimately because they don't really respect the canon in that sort of way. They want to subvert it and use it for their own ideological means. And I think that's really the problem with a lot of the ways this sort of historical analysis is done nowadays, with these sort of ideological underpinnings of justifying why it's important that their ideology strives above all else. And I suppose I'm somewhat guilty of this myself, and I don't really think anyone in that debate is in particular. But perhaps the critique really about, intellectuals and the kind of fallenness towards, what the working class wants or even cares about geopolitically in their own agency. I think the intellectual kind of always has this, sort of archetypical picture of, kind of being aloof and not really being all that material interested to begin with. And it is kind of interesting to perhaps look at, socialist thinkers. There is a lot of them that aren't necessarily, just totally vapid and, just all for materialism. That's ultimately their interpretation of what they think is, necessary for their theory and their outlook of the world. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an endorsement, but I think, that their outlook actually is in and of itself the issue at hand, insofar that it doesn't seem that they do understand that science and these sort of practices aren't going to be able to handle something like the loyalty towards family or faith, or understanding why you wouldn't, even if you were told you could form some, even if you told Keith Woods you could form an Ireland super topia with a bunch of migrant, high affluent workers, it's not likely he's going to say yes to that. Just, why would he? Why would he? It seems like he quite enjoys his life enough to, why would, if anything, he would probably change it in a different direction. But, if you actually affirm your life, if, someone with the geopolitical reality of Keith, who, lives in Ireland, and he kind of has that access to a sort of cultural awareness, or even rejecting something like birthright citizenship, and that sort of concrete gatheredness of your actual people. This is funny enough. It's actually been the kind of joke about the memes, but I actually, think it's funny to actually take the kind of Aristotelian sort of attitude towards the polis of that kind of direct. It's much more to be more direct towards the actual political, towards the sort of market, than trying to make it more and more abstract. And I think that's why in the debate it really fell off and flew off the handle for them when it came to these kind of neoliberal policies that even Has says he opposes them, but yet he points to the inevitability of them. Well, that just kind of seems like you're throwing the normies to the fire. And this isn't to say that he wouldn't live through that sort of hell himself. I think the kind of critique that's not put on intellectuals enough, maybe because they themselves aren't intellectuals, is that the intellectual is so aloof that he actually doesn't really understand that him not caring about material conditions is actually his own doing, and actually could be could actually cause the kind of vulnerability and to his own reasoning and thinking to begin with. And I think it is kind of a testament to the theory bro who kind of arises and believes he's kind of above it all and stands on this pedestal, above society, ready to bring about change or have this sort of importance towards it. This sort of intellectual administrator that you can find all throughout communist history. Of course, that is what its historical political use was, the kind of intellectual class subverting and looking for this kind of mandate for the worker, even if it wasn't necessarily there. And So I guess to summarize, it is kind of interesting to see, why Marxist thinkers, even today, don't really align themselves with Marx as much, simply because of the reality of mind duality and that kind of Spenglerian sort of psychological understanding that material conditions had its time in the industrial age, but we're looking at these things in a more conscious sort of pathological way, such that most Marxists and psychoanalysis go hand in hand now. I think that's kind of they had to adapt as you go through the 20th century. But yeah, I think this was just a sum up video of why I think that socialists, through their own kind of analysis of material causality, whether they're agreeing that they themselves believe in it or are casting it on their abstract reasoning at hand, is ultimately a part of the very tradition and system that they're looking to deconstruct and undermine to begin with. And the reason why fascist thought even rose to such prominence. And it is kind of interesting actually to look at that part of the debate as well, when it was brought up about the kind of financial backing of where both ideologies stand, and how obviously from our perspective you can see why it looks like throughout history it actually seems like you have the exceptional kind of revolutionary agrarian rise of the big man that comes back and shakes things up every once in a while. And I think that really does kind of resonate well with the dissident right, and understanding that it's just kind of cultivating enough people to be able to actually make it the kind of difference in the world, and they kind of actual concrete, somewhat more pragmatic understanding of how structures are actually made, and as opposed to just trying to just structure the structure or continuously reevaluate it over and over again, and kind of miss the point in my opinion. But yeah, I don't really like to do these react videos. I just like to share my own thoughts on why I personally don't associate with the kind of socialist outlook, and why I think it's important that the third position thinkers differentiate themselves, and could be a useful way for people to ordinate their own worldviews as well. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys.